Dibrig tú go díon nó chánig tú go dí an chathair seo, fuair his neart taithí agus d'urbar de chud scileanna. I ngacháte éigean tú, fecinn tú rud éige na chabhraigh tú a thógáil, ach inis tá tú ag féchant ar an todhchaí, agus beidir go bhfuil tú ag smaoinemh ar an áit as a dagan tú. In éireann, tastaíonn pleanálathe, siúnéirí, ploméirí, díanadóirí, inaltóirí, altíirí, banistóirí láithreáin agus níos móhain. Tastaíonn túhain, le do chud scileanna agus taithí go léir, chun cabhrúlinn na mílte tithe a thógáil. Tá an domhan tóga agat, a níos tar arás agus tógan teach a thóg tú. Tuile eolais ag gov.ie/Building Ireland. Teachtareacht ó rialtas na hÉireann.
This episode is brought to you by Paranormal Playback, a new podcast where hosts Shar, Mel and Laura recap the spooky and entertaining world of paranormal reality TV. Each week they take a fresh look at popular shows like Ghost Adventures and Kindred Spirits, blending humour with insight as they pull apart what's happening on screen. The three of them are a mix of believers and skeptics, which makes for really fun conversations, sometimes leaning into mystery, other times asking the questions viewers might be thinking themselves. With their background in creative production, they know how these shows are put together, so they're great at pointing out the moments that feel real versus the ones that might be more for the cameras. And their segment, This Old Haunt, digs into the true crime side of paranormal investigations, separating fact from fiction. With Halloween coming up, it's the perfect time to add something spooky, funny and a little addictive to your playlist. For even more spooky, ghostly, paranormal content with a humorous spin, go check out Paranormal Playback. It's 1973. The Exorcist is about to terrify theatres, but on a lonely stretch of land in western New York, something just as dark is waking in the walls of a farmhouse. Hello listeners and welcome back to another episode of Scary. As always, before we get into this week's episode, I need to say a special thank you to our new Patreon subscribers who are Jenny Esparza, Linda Carey, Karen Brett, Joe Loftus, Alison Jones, Ramona Craighill and Emma. Thank you so much for signing up to the show's Patreon, and if this is something you're interested in, you can find a link in this episode's show notes or simply go to patreon.com/scaryaparanormalpodcast, where you can gain access to ad-free main episodes and exclusive scary episodes. But now, let's get into our next paranormal case. Philip Dandy was a soft-spoken man who worked long hours at a printing plant in Buffalo. His wife Clara was a devout Catholic and homemaker, practical and deeply intuitive. Together they had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, all under one roof in a cramped city apartment that felt smaller by the year. When they found the old farmhouse in Hinsdale tucked away behind forest and field, it felt like a gift. The house stood at 3830 McMahon Road, white and weathered, with 2 stories, a sagging porch, and acres of wild land around it. The house had 4 bedrooms, faded wallpaper, and floorboards that sighed when you walked on them. The windows were drafty, the plumbing temperamental, but it was theirs. No traffic, no neighbours, just open air and the sound of wind through the trees. The family moved in on a Saturday in early July, and by the end of the first week, the entire family had unpacked and began to settle. Clara opened the windows to let in fresh air. The children explored the trees beyond the yard. Phil sat on the front steps and lit a cigarette, looking out at the gravel road that ended at their door. That first night, Clara woke at 4:03 a.m. to the sound of the phone ringing once. She listened, then lay back down. The next morning, a kitchen cabinet was open that she was certain she had closed. Later, she found a chair pulled out from the dining table. No one in the family remembered moving it. Phil checked the hinges, the floorboards, the frames of the doors. "Old house," he said. "It settles." But the calls came again. Always once, always late. And when you'd pick up the phone, there was no one on the line. Just a hum, then static, then silence. One night, Clara answered and thought she heard breathing, slow, measured, just beneath the hiss. She stayed on the line for nearly a minute, listening. Then a sound. Not quite a voice, not quite a word, just enough to make her drop the receiver. And it was this series of events that prompted Clara to keep a track. Monday, Thursday, Saturday. Always between 3 and 5 a.m. By the end of the second week, she had a list. The final entry read, "Woke from sleep. Rang at 4:11. Voice online. Mechanical. Not right." She didn't sleep well after that. It was during the third week that the sounds in the house began. At first it was subtle. A knock. A creak. Something brushing against the wall. One afternoon, when Clara was alone in the kitchen, she heard footsteps upstairs. Not the soft kind. These were deliberate, slow, crossing the floor above her head. She froze, holding a tea towel, waiting to hear them again. They stopped. She walked to the base of the stairs and called up. Nothing. Later that night, Phil heard them too. They began to hear the same heavy footsteps almost daily, always upstairs, always when everyone was downstairs together. The children noticed it too. One of the boys refused to go up to the second floor alone. The dog, normally calm, began to avoid the stairwell entirely. At night, the house changed. It became colder. The air felt charged. And then there was the chanting. It began on a Thursday just after midnight. Clara was in bed reading when she heard something through the open window. A soft, rhythmic sound that didn't belong. She stood, stepped onto the porch, and strained to hear. From beyond the trees, low, layered voices, dozens of them, male and female. No words, just breath and tone. As if the forest had lungs. Phil joined her. He heard it too. They stood side by side in the dark for nearly 5 minutes. Then the sound faded. They did not speak of it to the children, but 2 nights later it returned. And that was the first time Clara wrote the word chanting in her notebook. A word that she would write many more times. By late July 1973, the Dandys had been in the house for only a few weeks, but the sense of unease had taken root in every corner. The family reported that the air in certain rooms felt heavy, like the moments before a thunderstorm. The temperature would drop without cause, even in the heat of summer. No one in the family could quite say why they felt on edge, but they just did. One afternoon, Clara stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes while the children played outside. It was quiet, the kind of quiet she had once longed for. She then reported hearing a sound, soft at first, then louder, a slow creak. She turned just in time to see the cabinet door to her left easing open. It didn't swing, it dragged, as though reluctant. She stood frozen, the dish still in her hand, as the door fully opened and stopped. It happened again 2 days later, then again the following week. Always that same door, always when she was alone. Clara didn't mention it to Phil at first. She wasn't even sure if he'd believe her. He was practical, he was calm, the kind of man who didn't get rattled by noises in old houses. But when a ceramic mug flew itself from the counter one morning and smashed on the floor near her feet, with no one else in the kitchen, she told him everything. Phil said nothing. He picked up the pieces, swept the floor and inspected the counter. Maybe it was too close to the edge, he muttered. Clara let him believe that, if only to keep herself calm. But the house wasn't done. The footsteps were now a common occurrence. They started with faint movements upstairs, followed by dragging steps across the floor. At first they assumed that it was one of the children, but each time they checked, all 4 were downstairs. Clara reported hearing them regularly, often while folding laundry or preparing dinner. The pacing would begin in one bedroom and move to the other end of the hall, then stop, then start again. One night she called up the stairs, "Is somebody up there?" No answer. She climbed the steps slowly and turned on every light. Nothing, no movement, no sound, but the air in the hallway was ice cold. Phil had heard it too, on 3 separate nights while reading in the living room. He stopped mid-sentence and looked towards the ceiling, and thought to himself, that's not the wind. The children began to change. The youngest boy refused to go to bed unless someone stayed in the room with him until he fell asleep. One night he told Clara, "There's somebody in the hallway." She waits at the end near the closet. Clara checked. Nothing. The next night her daughter Beth said that she saw someone in her mirror. A lady. "She's standing behind me, but I turn around and she's gone." Clara dismissed it as imagination, but then late one evening as she passed by Beth's bedroom, she glanced inside and saw movement in the glass, just for a moment. A pale face, long dark hair. It vanished before she could turn on the light. She didn't tell the children. The dog, once confident and easygoing, began acting differently. It growled at corners, refused to go upstairs, slept near the back door, often whining during the night. Twice Clara found it trembling in the hallway outside the master bedroom, eyes fixed on the stairwell. August 1973. The family was gathered in the living room, the children seated on the floor while Clara tidied nearby. Without warning, a tall floor lamp, one they had owned for years, suddenly pitched forward with force and crashed into the wall. The bulb exploded, shards of glass scattered across the floor. No one had touched it. No one had even been near it. The children screamed. Clara ran to them, shielding their faces. Phil stood up, frozen for a moment, then walked over to the lamp, picked it up, checked the base. Nothing broken, nothing loose. He placed it back upright, walked to his chair and sat down without saying a word. After that, the energy in the house shifted once more. Even during daylight, the walls seemed darker. Hallways felt longer. Clara began keeping the curtains closed, though she couldn't explain why. And then there was Michael's room. Michael, the younger of the 2 boys, had always been a deep sleeper. But now he was waking up in the early hours, panicked, short of breath, unable to explain what scared him. One morning Clara found him sitting on the edge of his bed, pale and shaking. 2 boxed board games had fallen from a high shelf and landed directly on his chest while he slept. The other boxes, stacked neatly the night before, were still in place. She moved the games to the closet, reassured him, told him it was just a fluke. 2 nights later, the games fell again. This time one of the boxes struck him in the face, leaving a bruise above his eye. Clara didn't move them again. She threw them in a storage trunk downstairs and locked the lid. She told Phil they needed to talk to somebody. That same week, the phone rang again. This time Clara answered and heard a whisper, a voice she couldn't place. It spoke slowly, each word distorted as if underwater. Then, a sharp, high-pitched beep, like a machine failing, then silence. She placed the receiver back in his cradle and stared at the wall. That night she began her second notebook. She labelled the first page, Incidents, August. She listed every detail she could remember, the time, the location, what happened, who was present, how it ended. She didn't know what she was collecting, only it felt necessary. As though the house was trying to tell her something and she needed to listen carefully to hear it. The entries piled up quickly. Cabinet door open again while I was cooking. Dog refused to enter kitchen. Heavy steps from upstairs hallway, 2:47 a.m. Beck crying, says she watches me sleep. Voice on phone, not human. Lights flickered, they blew out. By mid-August, Clara had filled nearly half the book. The house didn't speak in sentences. It didn't scream, it whispered. Shifted, waited, and Clara, now more than anyone, was beginning to understand they were not alone, and whatever was in the house was no longer hiding. It had begun to show itself. By the end of August 1973, Clara Dandy was no longer trying to explain what was happening inside the house on McMahon Road. She had stopped questioning the cold spots, the footsteps, the flickering lights, the voices on the phone. She had stopped looking to Phil for explanations because he had run out of every practical answer he could think of. Instead, she had started watching the shadows. She watched them gather in corners, stretch across rooms, settle in places they hadn't been before. She also reported noticing patterns in the sounds, knocks that came in sequences, footsteps that mimicked the rhythm of breathing. She had filled nearly 2 notebooks by then, every entry marked with a date, time, weather, location in the house, every entry pointing to something intelligent, something organised, something watching. The family was unravelling. The children were sleep-deprived and nervous. Bet refused to enter her room after dusk. Michael had started sleeping on the floor outside his parents' door. The dog now barked nightly, always at the same spot at the top of the stairs. Clara began to notice bruises on her legs that she couldn't explain. On one occasion, she swore she saw a handprint on her wrist. No one had touched her. And this was when she began calling for help. Her first attempt was through the church. Clara contacted the local parish. She didn't know what she was asking for, she just needed somebody to listen. She described what had happened, the phones, the chanting, the voices, the movement. The priest she spoke to advised prayer. He offered to bless the home. He visited that weekend, walked through each room with holy water and incense, said prayers aloud, placed a small crucifix above the front doorway. That night, the family experienced their worst episode yet. At 3 a.m, a loud bang shook the house. Clara and Phil shot upright. Doors downstairs were slamming open and shut, one after another. The lights in the hallway turned on by themselves. The dog howled, a deep, primal sound that Clara said she had never heard before. They gathered the children and stayed huddled in the master bedroom until morning. And that's where we end part 1, but join me tomorrow when we finish off this fascinating story.
Dibrig tú go díon nó chánig tú go dtí an chathair seo, fuair his neart taithí agus d'arbair de chuid scileanna. I ngacháte éigean tú, fecinn tú rud éige na chabhraigh tú a thógáil, ach inis tá tú ag féchant ar an todhchaí, agus beidir go bhfuil tú ag smaoinemh ar an áit as a dagan tú. In éireann, tastaíonn pleanálathe, siúnéirí, ploméirí, díanadóirí, inaltóirí, altíirí, banistóirí láithreáin agus níos móhain. Tastaíonn túhain, le do chuid scileanna agus taithí go léir, chun cabhrúlinn na mílte tithe a thógáil. Tá an dahan tóga agat, a níos tar arás agus tógan teach a thóg tú. Tuile eolais ag gov.ie/Building Ireland. Teachtareacht ó rialtas na hÉireann.
Have you met All Modern? All Modern brings you the best of modern furniture and decor all in one place. Save up to 70% during their big sale of the year. Update your space with modern dining tables, chairs, and more. All on sale at All Modern, a Wayfair specialty brand. Plus, get fast and free delivery. That's modern made simple. Shop the big sale of the year October 26th through 29th online at allmodern.com.